The AFC East should be a very tight division, at least at the top with the top three teams. Nick Whalen and I are going to preview that division for fantasy and betting purposes coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. We are continuing our travels through the AFC, doing the AFC East right now. Nick, the Buffalo Bills have been a prohibitive top team in the AFC, one of the teams that thought to be challengers to the Chiefs' crown. They may not be the favorite in their own division this year. It's really tight this year up at the top.
AFC East is the tightest 1 through 3 that we have in the NFL right now, and it's really not all that close. Of course, Buffalo, the Jets, and the Miami Dolphins. Now, Buffalo and the Jets at DraftKings are plus 180 to win the division. Miami right behind them at 2-1. But it is interesting. There's a little bit of incongruency if you look at the Super Bowl odds, where the Bills are 15-1, and then you got the Jets at 20-1 and the Dolphins at 22-1. So I think what that tells me is, those three could finish in just about any order in the division, but there's still this belief that, Buffalo having the best quarterback, the best player in that division in Josh Allen maybe has the highest ceiling. Now, as you know, I'm a little skeptical of the Bills this season. I think we are putting a lot of faith in Josh Allen specifically, just kind of elevating everyone around him. And look, it is Josh Allen. He's very capable of doing that. He did it down the stretch last season, but this team was kind of in the Bills zone, the Eagles zone for a little bit there, right? I mean, they had kind of a reverse season to the Eagles where, week 7, week 8 last year, you're thinking, what is going on with the Bills? They lose to New England. They lose that ugly game to Cincinnati. They lose to Denver. They were 5-5 at one point. Remember, they were favored to not make the playoffs more than halfway through the season. And then they go on that run after losing in overtime to the Eagles. They beat the Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Chargers, the Patriots, and the Dolphins down the stretch. They beat the Steelers in the postseason and then end up coming up short yet again to the Kansas City Chiefs in the divisional. I'm a little skeptical of replacing Stefon Diggs. I know Stefon Diggs wears out his welcome. I know there's a belief that they kind of did it without Stefon Diggs for a lot of last season, where he was not putting up big time Stefon Diggs numbers down the stretch. Keon Coleman long-term could absolutely be that guy, but asking a rookie, a late first round pick to step in and replace that production, to me, it's asking a lot. They bring in Curtis Samuel, they bring in Mac Hollins, Marquez Valdes-Scantling. There are some veteran options in this receiving core, but this is kind of more of a top-heavy roster that the Bills have this year compared to years past. They've had some attrition on the defensive side of the ball as well. I do think the offensive line should, again, be one of the best in football. And look, if Josh Allen is playing at a top 3 quarterback level, the Bills will end up being just fine. But to me, they're still, they're a slight step behind what I would consider, the truly, truly elite teams in the AFC, being Kansas City and Baltimore, and even Cincinnati. If things break right health-wise for the Bengals, I think they're a better operation this year than the Bills. Fantasy-wise, though, where do you want to start with Buffalo? There's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, there sure is. Just a quick note, 10.5 is still the over-under on this team, so it's not like they're paupers or anything. I mean, anytime you start with Josh Allen, that's pretty good. Plus 1,500 Super Bowl odds, plus 800 to win the AFC, plus 180 in the AFC East. Contrast that with the Jets, who are about the same for the East, and the Dolphins are slightly off. It's interesting this year, though. I think let's start at the receiving core. I mean, you're starting about talking about replacing Stefon Diggs. You have Keon Coleman, who they brought in. They brought in Curtis Samuel. The top remaining guys, Khalil, Shakir. It's pretty much almost a brand new receiving core. It's really wild to see that there. Other than Shakir, you've got a rookie, you've got Samuel, you got Mac Hollins from a different team, Valdes-Scantling from the Chiefs, KJ Hamler, Chase Claypool. I mean, there's Gabe Davis is gone too. It's not just that's the thing. They are kind of replacing the entire receiving core there. Cole Beasley's not there to kind of get onto his immunization things. I won't go into that there any more than I did. I probably didn't even need to say that as it is. So, but point is, it's all new in the receiving core.
It's an interesting approach when you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, and they're kind of going with a quantity over quality approach in terms of the guys that they brought in. I mean, your top 2 receivers, arguably to begin the year, Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman, have 49 combined NFL catches. I mean, that's just there's risk there to me when you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, when you're in Super Bowl or bust mode, like the Bills are basically every year when Josh Allen is your starting quarterback. You have more questions at wide receiver than you would like to. And it's, for a team that has Josh Allen at quarterback, for the first receiver to be going off the board as wide receiver 48, that's a little stunning. That's Keon Coleman right now. We just talked about Cortland Sutton, in the AFC West spot. He's the top Denver receiver off the board. The top Buffalo Bills receiver goes later than the top Broncos receiver. That is not something we're used to in the fantasy world. Keon Coleman, wide receiver 48. Curtis Samuel, wide receiver 51. Khalil Shakir, wide receiver 52. So you have 3 Bills receivers, none of which go inside the top 100, but all of which tend to go within about a 12 to 15 pick span between pick 100 and pick 115.
Which of those do you like the best?
Oh man. I earlier in draft season when you were getting a better price on Curtis Samuel, he was the guy. Now I do think Khalil Shakir as the third wide receiver off the board is actually a reasonable value. I do wish both he and Samuel were going a little bit later. We're still talking like 110 to 120 range for both of those, sometimes higher. Keon Coleman to me is undoubtedly the most talented receiver in this group. I don't know what I expect from him in year one. I think year 2, year 3 and beyond, that could be the guy that they really hope develops into the next Stefon Diggs, different player, but obviously a wide receiver 1 archetype. Whereas, Samuel's kind of been this bit type of player, and, Khalil Shakir, we like what we've seen in small doses, but again, 39 catches last season. Like there's still a lot to unpack as far as where his NFL career goes. So, I do think, I guess Shakir at cost right now is where I would lean, but I don't really love any of these guys at their current acquisition cost. Again, I think Samuel and Shakir should probably be going a little bit later, and Coleman's still got that kind of rookie shine on him.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, it's not like the Broncos went out of their way to get Coleman. They traded down and then got him. It was interesting to see that. The Bills, did I say the Broncos? Probably because we were talking about the Broncos earlier. The Bills traded down. And then clicked on Coleman, so it's really kind of interesting there. But I think early on I was getting Shakir when no one was thinking of him. I was the lone voice of reason in the wilderness. No, I wasn't that. But early on I was getting him, and he was even going much later. Now I still might get him a little bit there. I think I'm willing to pay the market value on Coleman. Okay. If he's my wide receiver 4, yeah, I'm fine with that. I think there's some serious upside with him, at least. That's what I'm looking for with that sort of level. I'm not looking for the floor guy. I'm looking for the ceiling guy. That's why I'd also take Brian Thomas at that price too.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're similar players in similar situations, right? Where, at least with Brian Thomas, there's more of a clear, okay, Christian Kirk is there. And, much like in Buffalo, you have Evan Ingram and Dalton Kincaid, who are going to command targets at tight end as well. But, Buffalo is a little bit more of an unknown. I mean, it's totally possible that early on they bring Keon Coleman along a little bit more slowly. Maybe they trust the veterans in Mac Hollins and MVS a little bit more. I mean, MVS always seems to play more than he should whatever team he's on.
A great blocker.
Yeah, it's like teams love MVS. Fantasy players and fans make fun of him, but teams bring him in for a reason. I mean, he's played for 3 great organizations in his career, right? I mean, Green Bay, Kansas City, and now Buffalo. It's like these are teams that tend to make smart personnel decisions. They're not just bringing these guys in for no reason. So I think early on there's going to be some bumps in the road for Keon Coleman, but I think ideally, by midseason, he's probably your guy in Buffalo if things break right.
For sure. You alluded to Dalton Kincaid. Let's talk tight ends. He's the tight end 5 right now in the NFFC, just barely. He and Mark Andrews basically the same price. I kind of like Kyle Pitts around later for the same price. My reasoning for that is I think a lot is being bet on Kincaid's volume. And I think there is a with Dawson Knox and without Dawson Knox split with Kincaid, and Knox is still present. I think Knox is still going to draw away from Kincaid a little bit.
Yeah, I think Kincaid versus Andrews is really tough. Like I like Andrews more in a vacuum. We just, you got to factor in the injury concerns with Mark Andrews coming off of another serious injury last season. I think if you take that out of the mix, then Mark Andrews is probably going ahead of Kincaid, and you feel a lot more comfortable. But Mark Andrews is also deeper into his career, right? We're going into year 2 for Kincaid, and I think there's this belief that, all right, is there another level to go up after what was a strong rookie season? I think you like what you saw from Kincaid down the stretch. The final 4 games of the year were among his 4 most consistent. He had that great stretch, in the middle of the season as well, where he was averaging just about 60 yards per game, almost 8 targets per game from week 7 to week 12. I think the absence of Stefon Diggs and the absence of Gabe Davis, it's not a negative for Dalton Kincaid. It has to be viewed as a positive. If we have all these question marks and we're saying, man, that the first Bills receiver off the board is like pick 105, I don't know how you can't spin that as a positive for Kincaid.
Agreed. I think I agree with that. So yeah, I mean, it's not really a bold statement to agree with you on that either, for that matter. Yeah, it's for sure.
Whoa.
But I think I'd go Andrews and Pitts ahead of Kincaid nonetheless. I see the case for it. I could be wrong. Kincaid could be the tight end one. I think that is a potential outcome there still too. James Cook, often going in the running back dead zone. He's RB 13, I think he is. Yeah, RB 13. Pick 44 in the last month on the NFFC RotoWire Online Championship, right behind Rashad White, right ahead of Josh Jacobs. In that range, it's like round 4. I don't often get running backs there. That's the way I draft. I'm usually getting that third receiver there. I'm looking at my tight end. I've hopefully have one running back. I don't want James Cook to be my first running back. I would rather wait. I'd rather get a running back early and then wait and not fish in the zone. My reasoning for that is twofold. One, Cook, I don't think is going to be getting goal line carries a ton, either by hook with Josh Allen or crook with Ray Davis.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, he had 2 rushing touchdowns last season. And, I think James Cook to me like profiles as the type of back who's certainly capable of that. But when you have a quarterback in Josh Allen, who anytime you're inside the 3-yard line, that's going to be your best option. And then, like you said, another back in Ray Davis, who's looked good so far. There is some touchdown concern in terms of the upside for Cook. Volume wise, though, I did like what we saw, especially down the stretch. When Buffalo started to turn things around late in the season and even into the playoffs, I mean, James Cook was averaging 17 rush attempts per game over the final 9 games, including the postseason, 20 total touches, including about 3 catches per game in that span. So I do think the overall volume is going to be there, but yeah, it's similar in some ways to the same questions that you would have about Saquon Barkley with the Eagles, right? Where it's like when push comes to literal shove inside the 5-yard line, is it going to be Saquon? Is it going to be James Cook getting those carries? It might be Jalen Hurts and it might be Josh Allen. So I get that for sure. I've gotten a decent amount of James Cook this year. I mean, again, don't want him as my running back one. You're totally right. You should have ample opportunity to land somebody that you feel better about, but totally comfortable with him as an RB2.
Yeah. I just don't want to get my RB2 there. I guess.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many receivers in that range. I get that.
Yeah. So that's why maybe I'm going away from that. Yeah. And I think that, man, that Dallas game is carrying a lot of weight for what he did last year. It was a beautiful game. Don't get me wrong, but I think afterwards, like, he had volume without really a ton of production either. So I don't know. I'm kind of wary of Cook. I guess I'm probably fair. Not paying that price. All right. Any other Buffalo comments before we move on?
Only thing I'll say on that 10.5 win total is this is a pretty tough schedule. I think Warren Sharp has it as like the 7th or 8th toughest schedule in the NFL. There's like a couple cupcakes sprinkled in there. They get Tennessee at home midseason. They open up at home against the Cardinals. I think that's a pretty good spot. But I mean, you just look at some of the opponents out of division for the Bills, who of course have to play the Jets twice and they have to play the Dolphins twice, including at Miami in week 2, which is, one of the more difficult spots. Dolphins always seem to play well when it's 98 degrees and roasting in Miami early in the season. But out of division, they got to play the Jags. They got to play the Ravens. They got to play the Texans. They have to go to Seattle midseason in late October. That's not an easy game. They got to go to the Indianapolis Colts. They get the Chiefs out of division. They get the 49ers. They get the Rams. They get the Lions. I mean, this is a minefield of a schedule.
It really is. So bears noting that they have to play that schedule over and over and over again. Seems like they've had to play a lot of first place schedules lately. So that makes it a little bit tricky for them. Let's move on. But first, quick note from our friends at Fantasy Sports Knockout. Fantasy Sports Knockout, where a fantasy league meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league. But you must choose your players wisely. You can only use each player one time. The lowest weekly score or group of scores is eliminated from the contest every week. The concept may be simple, but survival is not. How will you play? Load up early or play the matchups and save the better players for later? Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. The New York Jets had a wasted season with Aaron Rodgers getting hurt on the very first drive of the season. They're left to see Zach Wilson prove that he is not a capable NFL starting quarterback, at least with a porous offensive line. This year, Rodgers is presumably healthy. Wilson is gone. They have an improved offensive line. Life seems good.
Life seems good. Yeah. Assuming that Aaron Rodgers actually stays healthy this season, life should be significantly better for the New York Jets, who still grinded their way to 7 wins last year, which is crazy to me. I mean, this team had more like Shaq and a fool moments, it felt like, than anybody last year, and was still a really difficult opponent for a lot of good teams, right? I mean, they beat the Eagles, they beat the Bills in week 1 last year. They have a win over the Texans as well. I mean, this was still a really difficult opponent. And, a lot of that, of course, is credited to the defense, which should, again, be one of the best in football. Now, they've done what they could, at least, to address the offensive line, right? It's kind of a combination of going out and finding some veterans, addressing that via the draft as well. I think that is far and away the top priority, other than keeping Aaron Rodgers healthy. And those things go hand in hand, right? The better your offensive line is, the less risk Aaron Rodgers is going to be at this season. And, when you look at this team winning 7 games a year ago and having, bottom 3, bottom 2 quarterback play for the duration of the season, we saw Tim Boyle out there in a couple of games, Jeff.
Yes.
I mean, this is going to be one of the biggest year-over-year upgrades. Even if you think Aaron Rodgers is a diminished version of himself at age 40 or 41, it's still just a massive, massive upgrade over what we saw last season. So there's plenty of reason to be optimistic. What does this do for Garrett Wilson, who I think has been a very good soldier these last 2 years, despite that horrendous quarterback play? Still pulled in 95 catches last year for over 1,000 yards, just 3 touchdowns. All of those touchdowns are just Garrett Wilson, willing his way into the end zone, basically stealing would-be interceptions away from defenders. I think Garrett Wilson is going to have a massive, massive year as long as Rodgers stays healthy. I mean, there are very few players, Jeff, in the NFL that would put up the numbers that he did last season in the situation that the Jets had at quarterback and just the general malaise of this offense. So it's a really interesting roster because beyond Garrett Wilson, there's not a whole lot there, right? I mean, it's
agreed.
You're rolling the dice on Mike Williams. And then after that, it's, Xavier Gipson, Alan Lazard, Malachi Corley, a young guy they're getting a look at. Tyler Conklin's just a solid veteran tight end, nothing special there. But then you have one of the best running backs in the NFL in Breece Hall as well. So it's a top heavy build on the offensive side of the ball. If things break right, I mean, this could be a 12-13 win team. That's not out of the question. But it really comes down to Aaron Rodgers' health and what level he's playing at.
Yeah, and given that, some of the other elite receivers now have question marks attached to them. CeeDee Lamb holding out, Jamar Chase holding in, Justin Jefferson, his quarterback play, we got good news on that. They looked pretty good this weekend.
Yeah, McCarthy looked good.
Tyreek Hill is starting to hit an age. He seems like he's getting his pull up a hammy moment every week at the end of the season last year. There's some things. There are no such question marks for Wilson right now. If I'm drafting towards the back end of the first round, I'm loving taking him at 8 or 9 every time. And he's our friend and colleague DJ Trainer took him even earlier in the RotoWire Vegas draft, but that's starting to look better and better. By the way, it's kind of interesting. But Garrett Wilson versus AJ Brown is a pretty legitimate question. I think I've got Wilson over Brown.
I think there's more upside with Garrett Wilson for sure. I think AJ Brown, you could argue, is the more proven commodity as far as if you're saying who has the best chance to give me 1,250 yards and 8 touchdowns. I think you could say the floor for AJ Brown is probably higher, but I think the ceiling for Garrett Wilson is absolutely higher. Again, doing what he's done the last 2 years with this quarterback play, I think he could take off in a way that even the most optimistic Garrett Wilson guys wouldn't expect. So I'm all in on him. I mean, he's got a huge upgrade at quarterback. He should essentially, be the target hog in this offense. Again, you don't really have to worry about Tyler Conklin. Anything you get from Mike Williams almost feels like a bonus if he's able to stay healthy. And again, there's not another even deep sleeper target that you feel great about in that receiver core. So I'm with you there. And I'm coming around really on Breece Hall too, as not that I was out on him necessarily, but as somebody that I'm really, really comfortable taking in the middle of round 1. Another guy who's in a bad situation last season, made the most of it. You think back to that week 18 game, 37 carries for Breece Hall. Yeah, that's not going to be sustainable, but I think he's somebody that will benefit a ton from the improvement in the quarterback play. However, do we see a decrease in the receiving volume for Breece Hall? Is 76 catches in play, because this will not necessarily be the check down raid that it was last year.
No, but Aaron Rodgers has supported a pass catching back before though too.
For
So
sure.
he doesn't need to have 76 to be that. If he
No.
gets 60, it's still pretty darn good.
Right.
Bijan versus Breece. Who are you taking?
As draft season goes on, I'm leaning Breece Hall. We're starting to hear some of these like, well, Tyler Algier, he's a really good back. We really want him to be in the mix. We're not really hearing that out of New York, who, they don't really have a clear number 2 right now. I thought Braylon Allen looked pretty good in their preseason opener this weekend, but he's a rookie and somebody that they'll use in spells, but not really somebody that I view as like a huge threat to Breece Hall's workload. And you're right, by the way, on the target quality for Breece Hall. It's like, yeah, he had 76 catches last year, 7.8 yards per reception. Compare that to 11.5 as a rookie. Much smaller volume. He only played 7 games, only had like 20 catches. So take that with a grain of salt. But even if he catches 55 or 60 passes for 10 yards a pop, as opposed to 7.5, I think you can make that up, in terms of the quality of those targets. And, another really interesting note on Breece Hall, Jeff, how many carries do you think he had inside the 5-yard line last year?
That's a good question. I'm guessing not as many because they weren't in the red zone that often. Right. I'll say 5.
One carry inside the 5-yard line for Breece Hall last season, 10 carries inside the 10. So part of that is, again, like you said, this team not spending time in the red zone. They should be a lot more productive. Those opportunities should be there. This is not a team where you're running the tush push with Aaron Rodgers. He's never been a QB sneak guy at all.
No.
Maybe that's where they use Braylon Allen. I mean, he is that Punisher, move the pile type of back. He's what I think AJ Dillon is supposed to be for Green Bay. And we saw that. That was on display. I mean, you watched some of Braylon Allen's runs the other day in the preseason game. I mean, he's picking up 2-3 extra yards at the end, just bowling over guys. So there is some concern about Breece Hall not being used in those situations. But either way, he's not ending this season with 1 carry inside the 5-yard line. I think there is some serious touchdown progression coming for Breece Hall.
Yeah. I've been finding myself wanting to draft Hall at pick 5, 1.5, going running back anchor, running back hero, and then kind of loading up on receivers and everything else after that, waiting on my second running back. That's the structure I've been most comfortable doing all season long.
Yeah, no, totally fine with that. I think Breece Hall is rock solid, as whether you're getting him in the middle of the first round, whether you're getting him later in the first round. I think significant upside here. I don't, unless you're worried about the injury from 2 years ago carrying over, which I'm really not. He's young. He just played 17 games last year. I think he proved about as definitively as he could that he's back to being that durable back that he was at Iowa State. I'm all in. And like I said, I'm now taking him over Bijan.
Yeah, I am too. By the way, I'd be pretty happy if I did select 5 we have a select our draft position sort of thing. I selected 5. If someone takes Hall before me, I will take Bijan there too. I'm pretty comfortable with that too. Allen is the risk factor there though, but I do think that's something I would be willing to go ahead and go with there. Any other Jets? And here's the problem with the Jets. Their defense is going to be awesome. Yep. It's a very narrow tree. It's great for us if you have Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall. You're loving how narrow of a tree it is. Is there another Jet that you would consider drafting?
Not really. No, I mean, Mike Williams is a consideration, obviously, at the right price. He's a player that I've always loved. I think nobody like fits the mold more of that like downfield, just alpha, 6'5", 230, is just going to go up and get it type of receiver. Like, the highs for Mike Williams have always been really high. But I found myself kind of backing off. And again, you're getting him in at the 130s or even the 140s in some drafts. So the acquisition cost, I think, is probably worth it at this point for Mike Williams. He's going in the same zone as Dontavian Wicks, who could be like the 4th receiver for the Packers. He's going in the same zone as Jahan Dotson, Jerry Jeudy. Like, these guys have big time question marks. So I don't think the price for Williams is outrageous. I do have some Mike Williams in best ball, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm totally avoiding him, but he's the guy. I'm not touching Allen Lazard. I'm not all that interested in Xavier Gibson. I would keep an eye in deeper leagues on Malachi Corley, their 3rd round pick out of Western Kentucky. He made some plays, was also their kick and punt returner, by the way, in the preseason opener. So we'll see if that continues. But if you're looking at somebody who maybe you grabbed in Scott Fishbowl, or somebody to pick up for those return yardage stats in the Scott Fish Bowl. That's somebody I'd keep an eye on. But really, like you said, it's a very narrow tree, and that's what makes Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson all the more appealing.
Yeah. To wit, the NFFC ADP, 5 for Hall, 10 for Garrett Wilson, 137 is the next jet at Mike Williams. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers doesn't go to like pick 185. He doesn't go in every single draft. It's pretty eye-opening there. So it's just, it doesn't, it seems like someone should emerge if Rodgers is healthy and productive, that you would find a second receiver. Maybe it is Williams, maybe it's Corley. We'll see about that. But anyways, that's where we're at right now. Miami Dolphins are next, but first, a quick note from our friends at Circa. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back. Circa Survivor and Circa Million are now up to 16 million in guaranteed prizes. 2 ways to win and no rake. Circa Survivor contestants select one team each week with no point spread. Last the longest to win it all with $10 million guaranteed. In Circa Million, make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of the $6 million guaranteed. Quarterly and full season payouts. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere. Visit circasports.com for details. Here with Nick Whalen, we're going to talk a little Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins are set. Their over/under total is set at 9.5 wins. They're plus 200 to win the AFC East. Contrast that with the Jets, are mostly now at 10.5 and plus 180. It's a small gradation, but I mean, it's you get that bonus win at least if you're trying to bet the over.
Yeah. It's an interesting breakdown, and both the Jets and the Dolphins have relatively easy schedules. Both are in the top 10 easiest schedules per Warren Sharp. Jets projects to be a little bit easier. They, of course, finished third in that division ahead of Miami, so that's really the differentiation point. But out of division, neither of these teams, have crazy roads. And the Dolphins, to me, it's always a tale of two halves, right? They look like the best team in the NFL the last couple of years through like week 7 or 8. And then when some of those cold weather games start to kick in, that's when it gets a little bit dicier. But they do have to go to the Browns in week 17 and to the Jets in week 18. Other than that, though, for those cold weather games, there's not a ton to worry about. It's like they're on the road in late October for the Colts, but that, of course, is a team that plays in a dome. They do have to go to the Bills in early November. We'll see how cold it is at that point. They go to the Rams, another dome team. They do have to play at Green Bay on Thanksgiving, so that'll be a tough one as well. But the way a lot of their late season games break down, they're either at home or they're in a dome. Another one would be Houston late in December. So I think the schedule breaks down pretty well for the Dolphins. I think this team, for the most part, should look a lot like it did last season. And I think the challenge for Mike McDaniel is, how do we avoid the mid to late season malaise that seemed to set in for the Dolphins each of the last couple of years? Part of it is staying healthy. Both Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill felt like they were banged up on a week-to-week basis late in the season. They could do a little bit better job managing those guys. Obviously, Achane, was kind of in and out throughout the season. But let's start at running back for the Dolphins, because I think that's what's most interesting. Raheem Mostert is coming off of one of the all-time out-of-nowhere career seasons at, age 30 or 31 last year. And I feel like in years past, Jeff, maybe like 5-10 years ago, like before the overload of fantasy information age, we would see like a massive hike in cost for Mostert. Everybody would be buying in. I feel like we haven't really seen that. Like pretty unanimously, everybody's like, yeah, let's see him do it again. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination of a couple things. One, the age at which his breakout came. He was 31 last year. 32-year-old running backs don't often exist. B, it's the injury profile too. That he's been hurt a lot in his career. So I think people are rapidly discounting it. But Achane gets hurt in his own right too.
Right.
And that's the thing.
He does, and that's the rub with Achane, right? And that's the reason that, to me, every podcast I listen to, every article I read, it's like, if you're looking for sleepers or busts or whatever, it's like everybody has an opinion on De'Von Achane. Like, you either love him, you're all in, or you think he's going to be a bust because he's going to get hurt, or the volume's not going to be there, or they brought in Jaylen Wright and that's going to affect things. He's going right now as about the 20th player overall. Essentially the same pick as Travis Etienne, 1 pick ahead of Derrick Henry right now. So it's kind of a take your pick out of those 3 if you're looking for a running back in the middle to late round 2 range. I tend to be a little more skeptical of Achane. I like him a lot more in best ball, where you kind of look at every week is like its own little contest. You want that like 40-point week that De'Von Achane is absolutely capable of delivering. But I think there's going to be a lot of weeks where he's either banged up and not out there, or the snaps are limited, or, teams are going to be keying on him a little bit more than they were last year when he came out of nowhere. There's just a little bit more risk than I would prefer. Like if I'm taking a running back in the middle of round 2, it can't be, I don't want it to be a boom or bust guy, right? I need that to be somebody that I can lock in and at least feel good about. I don't want to lose my draft on De'Von Achane.
Yeah. By the way, there's no shortage of opinions on Achane. Everybody seems to have one too. No one talks about Mostert. It's so funny. And I get why. I mean, Achane can win your week, and I get that. I think in a best ball that's especially appealing. I think in a managed league, I think I'm less inclined to go the route, but man, you get some serious FOMO when you see him putting up a 40-point week, which he's easily capable of doing. That Denver week is going to it just hovers over everything though. I think that was a video game day. I mean, where everything was just so easy for the Dolphins that day. There's so much speed on this team. They spent another pick on a running back too, by the way. It's not just Achane and Mostert. It's the fact that they got Jaylen Wright too. I mean, I think Jaylen Wright's going to play some. I think he's another guy though that gets his speed. He went 10 for 55 in the first preseason game. Both the top running backs sat out, of course, and Jeff Wilson was actually ahead of Wright, but nonetheless, I don't know. Mostert, it's so dependent on the touchdowns, which seems incredibly unlikely to come anywhere close to repeating. Yeah, no, it's not a brave statement to say, he's not going to get 18 touchdowns. He may not get 8. That's the thing. That's the tougher part.
Well, first of all, I'm with you. I think Jaylen Wright will have a role. I think it'll likely be a smaller role, but still a role in this backfield. I think, Mike McDaniel is somebody that likes to have options. I think they took, Jaylen Wright is kind of in that Miami mold, right? He just seems like he would be a Dolphin. He's the type of player that they tend to target at that position. And, he's a 4th rounder. It's not like some 7th rounder that they just took a flyer on. I mean, it's a 4th rounder in today's NFL is like, taking a high 3rd round running back, right? I mean, you see 4th round and you just think, yeah, maybe that's nothing, but that's just kind of how running back investments work at this point. And again, I love Achane, the player. I will fully acknowledge that the best case scenario for Achane is he's like RB2 or 3 this season. I mean, if they really feed him that workload, if you think the workload's going to be there and you think he's going to stay healthy, nobody's questioning the talent. There's no real question there. It's just even down the stretch last season, he missed that 5-week stretch, including the bye week. And once he was back at full strength, starting week 13 against Washington, he was averaging about 13 touches per game. That's not going to get it done. Like you need 15 to 17, if not more, touches per game if you're taking Achane with the 18th or 19th pick in your draft. And again, maybe that's there. If that's there, totally fine investment at 20. I have my question marks as to whether or not that'll be the case. I think there are significantly safer options who maybe don't have that same ceiling. I don't think ETN or Derrick Henry or Kyron Williams have a De'Von Achane ceiling, but I think they have a much, much higher floor.
I'd agree with that. Let's go to the receiving core. Tyreek Hill, sometimes he goes as high as number 2, sometimes as low as like number 7 or 8, like he did in our draft in Vegas, but that was a month ago. I think if we relitigated that draft, he would go, some of the people that passed on him might not. I'm still taking Breece Hall over him, but I get it for some of the other people there. Where do you fall on Tyreek Hill?
I mean, he's starting to go number 1 in some drafts. In the last week at the NFFC, we've had 5 different players go number 1. That's over 45 drafts. Obviously, McCaffrey, the most common number 1 pick, but Tyreek Hill right behind him, CeeDee Lamb, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, they've all gone number 1 in that span. So it's, if you're backing off of McCaffrey for whatever reason, most likely the calf issue, Tyreek Hill is going to be a consideration if you have the number 1 pick. And I think there is a case to be made that, given what's going on with CeeDee Lamb, given what's going on with Jamar Chase, the quarterback concerns in Minnesota, that if you do want to go receiver there, the only real knock on Tyreek Hill is his age and the fact that he does always seem to be banged up with these minor injuries. Tyreek Hill turned 30 this past March, so I don't necessarily see him as the type of player who will fall off a cliff this season, but he's also a speed, agility, quick movement, quick twitch reliant player. And guys like that don't tend to sustain that, well into their 30s. So I think he's still going to be fine this year. Beyond that, I'll have some questions. Part of it comes down to what you think about Tua as well. I'm not the biggest Tua guy. Was great early in the season, really tapered off over the second half. I mean, he was like, borderline like top 12, top 15 quarterback over the second half of the year. So that's something to consider as well. But, it's hard to poke holes in Tyreek Hill. I mean, to me, it's still the most explosive receiver in the game, still the most fun to watch receiver with the ball in his hands.
Jaylen Waddle dealing with an unspecified injury in practice. We're not really concerned too much about that right now, except it's just to illustrate he was dealing with that a lot last season. And that always gives me pause on trying to draft him the next year. Going the same range as Devontae Adams, maybe slightly after, slightly before Malik Neighbors and Nico Collins. I'll say this right now. Give me Nico Collins over Jaylen Waddle every day of the week. There, I said it.
Wow. Unbelievable, Jeff. No, I'm fine with that. Waddle, he's the clear number 2. That's the thing. And, there's plenty of wide receiver 1s on the board at that time. So it's kind of it's an interesting debate of, do you want the number 2 receiver in what could be the highest scoring offense this year, the team that led the NFL in total yards and passing yards last season, versus the number 1 in what could be a slightly lesser offense. Jaylen Waddle versus Michael Pittman is a debate that a lot of managers have to have. And, Collins, Waddle, and Pittman basically have the same ADP at this point. We're actually starting to see Cooper Kupp creep up into that range as well. Yep. We've seen some Deebo Samuel inflation in light of the Brandon Ayuk situation. And, Malik Neighbors not far behind at this point either. He's going 29th overall in the NFFC over the last week. I love Jaylen Waddle, one of my all-time favorite college players, just like one of the coolest players in the NFL, in my opinion. I do worry about the injuries. He's not a big guy. He takes a ton of hits. Tua is still a guy. He's managed his own health. He still kind of leaves his receivers out to dry more than you would like over the middle. And Jaylen Waddle seems to be on the receiving end of a lot of those hits. Played 14 games a year ago, was probably fully healthy for like 10 of those. Mm-hmm. He's going into year 3. He played 17 games as a rookie. I'm not saying this is some like disastrous health track record, but he's not necessarily one of those guys that you just pencil in and say, yep, for sure, 16, 17 games.
Yeah. I agreed. By the way, some commentary on DJ Moore in the chat. I take DJ Moore over Waddle too. And I do think he's a number 1. He just got paid like a number 1 by the Bears. Yeah. I think, Keenan Allen exists. Yes, he is there. Moore is the guy that's still going to be the number 1 on that team. And I'm excited about this Bears offense already. I know it's one preseason game, but yeah, I'm in on that too. Give me a lot of DJ Moore at his price.
Yeah. I mean, he's in some ways in the Garrett Wilson zone, right? But he was even better than Garrett Wilson last year. And the Bears quarterback play, I guess, was slightly better than the Jets, but putting up almost 1,400 yards, 8 touchdowns, 136 targets last year for DJ Moore. Of course, the rub is that they have significant target competition compared to last season, right? But in Keenan Allen, who's always been a target monster, and Rhamondre Stevenson, who's an incredibly high-end number 3 wide receiver for this team to begin the year. But I'm with you on DJ Moore. I'm coming around. I think he's pretty clearly their number 1 guy. I still think Keenan Allen has a huge role this season. I think it's probably kind of a one and done for Keenan Allen. He's there to help Caleb Williams, to mentor Rhamondre Stevenson, but he's still going to put up Keenan Allen numbers, probably a slightly diminished version of the guy that he was with the Chargers. But yeah, DJ Moore is absolutely that number 1. And this receiving tier, there are 6-7 receivers who basically go like 5 picks apart on average. It's really an eye of the beholder, right? Somebody might like Collins, somebody might like Waddle, somebody might be a Michael Pittman guy. You might have somebody in your draft take Cooper Kupp. He's gone as high as 13, by the way, in the last week at the NFFC. Mm-hmm. I kind of like all these guys, to be honest. There's not a single one of that group that I would say, yeah, I'm not taking him. Pittman to me probably has the lowest ceiling, so he would be the guy that I'm off of most. But yeah, Collins, Waddle, Pittman, Samuel, Evans, Neighbors, Moore, really, really interesting wide receiver tier. And Brandon Ayuk, belongs in that too, depending on where he lands.
Exactly. One more, going back to the Dolphins, one more name to throw out at you for the last pick in the draft. Malik Washington getting a lot of work in that first preseason game, impressed in joint practices, did some running and some receiving. Another one of those fits the McDaniel mode. And I think that's someone to kind of keep an eye on. 6th round rookie out of Virginia.
Yeah, I think in very deep leagues or in dynasty, absolutely. For redraft, it probably needs an injury or two, right? I mean, it's going to be dominated by Hill and Waddle. This team does have Odell Beckham as well, who will be a part of this offense when healthy. Braxton Berrios is still there. River Craycraft, who had some moments. I like Malik Washington. I like what he showed in the preseason opener, especially kind of using him as this gadgety guy that's so valuable in Miami specifically. But anything but a really deep league, probably not somebody you have to worry about a ton.
Yeah. Any other Dolphins comments there? We didn't really talk Tua himself.
No, not too much. I'm not the biggest Tua guy, like I laid out earlier. I think he's going at a price where in a 12-team league, he's not even a QB1. But if I've already locked up a quarterback, like let's say I took Jordan Love or Dak Prescott, I'm not turning around and taking Tua. I'm going to wait much later and just grab, I don't know, Kirk Cousins or Matthew Stafford or Aaron Rodgers, who I think has some serious touchdown potential this year. Even Justin Fields has some increasing appeal in Pittsburgh. He's in that zone for me where I guess if I'm waiting on quarterback in a draft, I'm not taking Tua at pick 100. I'm going to wait another round or two and take any of the guys I just mentioned. Even Trevor Lawrence goes like 2 rounds after Tua. I'm just kind of out at cost.
Okay, fair enough. And it just we're kind of blessed with a good amount of depth at quarterback that feels like this year that you can make those sort of kind of calls. All right, we got the Pats still left to talk about. But first, got a quick note from our friends at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings. Well, look no further because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college football fantasy leagues. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top fantasy football platform in the industry. Coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league. Plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Got one team left. It's the Pats. We're not giving as much time to this team because there's not as much to invest in from a fantasy perspective. They are projected to only win 4.5 games. Huge underdog with the top 3 all close together for the AFC East. The Pats are plus 2,500 to try to win the AFC East.
And I've seen there's a ton of money coming in both on the Pats under and the Pats to finish with the worst record in the NFL. I think I saw a tweet that there's been like 5 times more money wagered on the Pats for that worst record bet than any other team. And I think that makes sense, right? I mean, they're for the first time in a very long time, they've seemed to be like fully accepting that this team is in rebuild mode, right? I mean, it's a completely new era of Patriots football. No Bill Belichick. We're kind of turning over a new leaf. I think this team is going to look different. They're going to play differently. They have a new rookie quarterback in Drake Maye, who played one series Thursday night against Carolina, 2 of 3 for 19 yards. We saw a lot more Bailey Zappi. We saw Joe Milton, who did some really nice things. I mean, kind of did exactly what you'd expect from Joe Milton, running around back there, dodging sacks, picking up first downs. I'm not really all that worried about Joe Milton, encroaching on Drake Maye. It was kind of a weird decision by the Pats to take Joe Milton, but I don't mind the upside play there. But look, you take a quarterback in the top 5, that guy is going to be your guy. He's at least going to get every single possible opportunity to earn that spot. So I don't know if Drake Maye starts from day one. They do have Jacoby Brissett, of course, as well. But we see this every year, Jeff. These teams that try to slow play it and say, well, he's going to sit behind the veteran for a little bit. That pressure is too much. Like it's whether it's from the fan base, whether it's from the front office, like these rookie quarterbacks get in earlier on average, unless you have like an Aaron Rodgers or an Alex Smith ahead of Jordan Love or Patrick Mahomes, respectively. If it's a Jacoby Brissett type, those guys tend to step away pretty early. New England, though, I mean, they're on the short list of teams that just don't seem to have a ton of fantasy interest, right? You have Rhamondre Stevenson, who got his new contract. Everybody kind of unanimously agrees, like, yeah, he's a fine back. I don't mind taking him in the 60s or the early 70s. But beyond that, I mean, the receiving core, kind of a mess right now. You don't see the first New England receiver off the board until usually the 150s or the 160s, and that's Demario Douglas right now in the NFFC.
Yeah, I do have a little bit of Pop Douglas there every once in a while. It's but you're right. It's Stevenson, or it's really kind of, and Hunter Henry probably gets drafted, but he's not even a top 12 tight end. It's tough. I don't know. Going back, I think the QB discussion is really interesting. I think it's noteworthy there because we've seen a couple instances lately where teams have slow rolled the quarterback, and it's worked out. Jordan Love is the most recent example. We're like, we all kind of castigated the Packers for the way they handled it, but it turns out they were right. They were able to pawn off Rodgers. They were able to kind of develop Love slowly. Yep. And now he's a franchise quarterback. He's getting paid as such. They had to pay for that privilege to get him. Now, the thing is, they got 1 year, starting year with him on his cheap contract in the case of Love. Is a team willing to do that? I mean, that's probably an extreme example, but a lot of times you'll see a prize quarterback waits for a year, and that year is super valuable. I go all the way back to, as a Bengals fan, Carson Palmer sitting for 1 year behind John Kitna. It worked. It really worked. Patrick Mahomes sitting behind Alex Smith worked out really well. Most teams are so bad, though, they can't afford that. They're just so bad. They're like, okay, let's play the rookie. And that works too sometimes. But I feel like sometimes they get pressure into playing the rookie before he's ready.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that happens, I would say, far more often than the other situation, which, again, you have to have someone in place, and you have to want to win in the short term in order to even pull that off, right? I mean, I guess Penix in Atlanta is maybe going to be the next example of this, but it takes the right situation, I think, to have the patience to sit Jordan Love for multiple years, or sit Patrick Mahomes for a year, or sit Michael Penix for 3 years. Who knows what it's going to be in Atlanta?
He's old, though. That's the thing that's so funny.
Look, we don't have to get it. This is not an NFC South pod. You're right about that, but I just think when Aaron Rodgers or Alex Smith is your quarterback and you're winning 10 or 11 or 12 games, it's a lot easier to not play that rookie quarterback. But when it's Jacoby Brissett and you're 1-6 through 7 weeks, it starts to become, okay, what's the downside here? Let's at least see what the kid has. And more often than not, teams end up caving to that. So we'll see if Brissett even makes it that long, or if he even starts the year. Who knows? But either way, I don't have a ton of interest in Demario Douglas. Jalen Polk is an interesting later round guy. Somebody that I liked quite a bit at Washington last season. They put a second round investment in him. Kendrick Bourne, technically they're number one, but he tore his ACL. I think it was week 8 or week 9 last year. He's on PUP right now. Yep. Not all that interested in Hunter Henry. He was somebody a couple years ago that I liked, and had 6 touchdowns last year, but I think there's probably some regression coming there. I don't think those are necessarily sustainable. The line is, it's not going to be a very good team. It's not going to be a very good offense. They're seemingly out of the Brandon Ayuk sweepstakes, so there's not some sort of number one wide receiver help coming to change their fortunes. Even bad teams produce plenty of fantasy stats. We do need to keep that in mind. I'm not saying the Patriots are a total cross. Really, in most leagues, Jeff, unless you're playing in a really deep league, it's kind of Rhamondre Stevenson and then everybody else.
Yeah, it really is. It's interesting. Jalen Polk didn't play that much. He had to wait behind KJ Osborne and Tyquan Thornton in the first preseason game too. It was really a weird sort of thing. And remember, it's a new head coach. That's he's making the rookies pay their dues, and it's just one preseason game, so I don't want to get too up in arms about it. But we want to see these kids play. We want to see this there, but maybe maybe it's just kind of an easing him in sort of thing. We'll watch them carefully in the preseason to see if Polk gets more reps going forward, because I think he should. See what they have in him.
I think he will. You have to keep in mind, for the first time in 20 years, there's no expectations for the Patriots, at all. There's no, even last year when we knew they were going to be bad, there was still Bill Belichick, he might will this team to 8 wins. No, obviously early on it was clear that wasn't the case, but there's none of that pressure. There's no Tom Brady. There's no Belichick. It's a clear rebuild. There's a reason that they're 180-1 right now to win the Super Bowl. And, you have a defensive minded head coach now in Gerard Mayo. It's not like they went and brought in, a Shane Steichen type or a Sean McVay disciple, right? There's not this oh man, what is this guy going to do with this offense? It's just kind of it's boring personnel. It's kind of a boring head coach. There's not a lot of, you really got to dig to try to talk yourself into the upside for this offense. So I guess we should probably talk a little more about Rhamondre Stevenson, because he is the one Patriot who's relevant to just about every draft. Going right now as the 66th overall pick. He's kind of in his own tier as far as running back ADP goes. You typically see the Alvin Kamara's and Kenneth Walker's go off the board about a round earlier. But Stevenson is in there with Aaron Jones, with James Conner, with David Montgomery, even DeAndre Swift in some leagues, Amir White. And he's typically the first off the board of that group.
Yeah, that's where I start looking for my second running back. And I like Stevenson the most among those. He also costs the most among those. So, but so if I happen to be in position to start that run, I will. I think Stevenson is going to get just a lot of volume.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it good volume? That's a fair concern. Is he going to lose pass catching opportunities? Does he get benched in case of a fumble? These are the sort of things you have to worry about with anyone. But yeah, you got to I think you're getting workhorse volume for a part-time price.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. You're getting a pretty defined touchdown ceiling as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the reason that there is some hesitation with Stevenson. I mean, he did have 2 20-point weeks last year, both in week 9 and in week 12, but both of those were kind of outliers. I think one of those was the Washington game where he ripped off a long touchdown and then he had 4 catches for 42 yards. Like, that's not necessarily what you expect from him week in and week out. And the other one was against the Giants, which was a shaky defense. That was a 21 carry game for Rhamondre. He had 5 catches for 9 yards in that game. I mean, it's high volume versus low efficiency, and you can almost lock that in when it comes to Stevenson. So I think when you're shopping in that tier of running backs, I don't mind it. I don't think you're paying a bad price by any means. I think there's a little more upside with Connor. I think, to me, lower volume with Montgomery, but much higher quality touches for him in Detroit. And I don't even mind, shopping for receiver in that range either. It's like you can get Jaden Reed at essentially the same ADP as Rhamondre Stevenson.
Yeah, just got to pick the right week for Reed, which is always the frustrating thing. But yeah, but he's also your wide receiver for your flex, so it makes a whole lot of sense. So I get it there too. Antonio Gibson is a threat to take away some pass catching. And for that matter, if it's Brissett, I feel better about Stevenson getting goal line carries. Maye is sneakily mobile. And might steal a goal line carry or 2 away. So it's something to think about there as well. But I do like waiting till, if you can get Stevenson like the 6th or 7th is a anchor running and you already have an anchor running back ahead of him. He's the first of your group of running backs to get for your RB2. Then I like it. But then you have to choose which week to start him. And that's always the tricky part there too.
Yeah, well, that's why you grab another running back probably shortly after, right?
Yep,
you don't want to be going in as all right, I need Rhamondre Stevenson to be my RB2 every week. I think that's going to be a fool's errand. Like, if he's floating between your RB2, RB3, if you get somebody late that hits, and some weeks you just feel comfortable benching him, that's fine. But you just can't emerge from your draft thinking, all right, I'm set at running back. I got Breece Hall and Rhamondre Stevenson. You still need insurance behind Rhamondre on that roster.
For sure. I like the fantasy defense for the Pats, except for the fact that they're going to be on the field a lot. And I fear like them getting worn down by just constantly being on the field.
I think that's fair. They're a tough defense to roster early on because they go to Cincinnati in week 1. I don't love that. They get Seattle in week 2. I'm pretty high on Seattle this season. I don't like that matchup. And then they're at the Jets and at the 49ers. And then they get the Dolphins and the Texans. I mean, this is a brutal first half of the schedule for the Pats. Going even deeper. So again, Bengals, Seahawks, Jets, Niners, Dolphins, Texans, Jaguars, Jets. Those are their first 8 games. I mean, this team could easily be 0-8.
Mac Jones revenge game against the Jaguars there.
No love lost. That's in London.
Yeah. Ooh, huge. They'll play them for sure, just for kicks and giggles. All right. Any other Pat's thoughts before we sign off?
Absolutely not.
I agree. Thank God. All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for all the commentary in the live stream. And if you like this, please rate, and review the podcast. Check out RotoWire, rotowire.com/pod. Get that free peek behind the paywall. Big thanks to Circa. Big thanks to Fantrax. And of course, now to our new sponsor, Fantasy Sports Knockout as well. We'll be back at you again with 2 more divisional previews next Monday. Thanks for listening to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast.